play and call it work.
Hey everybody, Matthew here from MiniWarGaming.com, and welcome to another How to Play Warhammer 40k 8th Edition tutorial. That's what this is. Been filming a lot of these today, even though you've seen them all over a course of a week. Been filming a lot of them. Anyway, today we're going to combine two topics because one of them is really fast. That's the morale phase and transports. Actually, both of them will probably be pretty quick, but morale phase should be super quick because it's really easy. So I didn't want to make a whole video and battle report that's just about the morale phase. It just didn't seem really worth it. And as usual, though, we will have an extra battle report for you at the link in the video description below, which will focus on transports. Morale phase, I can't say if a battle report will focus on morale phase because it always has morale phases, and it just depends on how badly somebody dies or if they actually take morale checks. But we'll make sure there's lots of transports in the battle report so that you can see how they interact with everything. So I'm going to show you how transports work, how the morale phase works, and of course, if you have anybody that you know that wants to learn how to play Warhammer 40k 8th Edition, tell them to go to MiniWarGaming.com/howtoplay40k to get all these videos. Let's take a look at the morale phase. In the morale phase, both sides have to check to see if any models are going to run away because they are afraid or whatever narrative reason you want to come up with. It simply means that we go through every unit that has lost one or more models and they take a morale check. A morale check is simply a D6 roll where you add the number of models that were slain. This is not number of wounds, I should point out. So if you have 2 wound models like the intercessors on the left and you lose 3 of them, then you would add 3 to the die roll, not 6 because they lost 6 wounds. And if you equal or get lower than your leadership stat, then you pass the morale check. If you roll higher than your leadership stat, then you failed it. And you lose a number of models, not wounds, models equal to whatever you failed it by. So to make that really, really clear, we are going to show you exactly how that works. So on the left, we have a large unit of 10 intercessors. And on the right, we have a smaller unit of 6 plague marines. And so let's say it is the Space Marines' turn, and they start off, and they rapid fire their bolters in, and they kill 2 of the plague marines, which will take these. I'm just going to lie them down so we can keep track of how many died. And then let's say that the Space Marines charge in, and as they go to charge in, the Overwatch gets really lucky and kills 2 intercessors. And so then they complete their charge. And then after they charge, they get to strike first, and they kill 1 more Plague Marine. Actually, let's make it 2, just so we can see how this works even better. And then the Plague Marines get to swing, and they get lucky, and they kill 2 of the intercessors. And we do all our pylons and consolidates. We've already covered how to do all these different phases, so I'm not really worried about the details of how all of this happened. Now, once we get to the morale phase, so essentially after the fight phase is done, starting with the player whose turn it is, you take a morale test for units from your army that have had models slain. So I know that if you're really looking at the numbers, you might realize that some of that was probably impossible to happen, but it doesn't matter. Just for argument's sake, we're going to say this is what happened. So we have 4 Space Marines who died, 4 intercessors who died. Now, even though they're 2 wounds apiece and they lost 8 wounds, we are only going to add 4 to our roll. So I roll a d6, I add 4 to that roll, bring it to a total of 9, and I compare it to the leadership of the intercessors. Now, intercessors are leadership 7, but their sergeant is leadership 8. So as long as he's alive, you can use his leadership instead of the rest. So you don't kill your sergeant until you have to, because it makes a big difference. So in this case, that 5 plus 4 is 9, compared to the sergeant's leadership of 8. I failed that morale test by 1. So one of my models would just run away. Or in the rules, it just says he is slain, but essentially it's him running away or whatever might be happening. It doesn't matter how many wounds they have. They could have 2 wounds, 3 wounds, 4 wounds, 5 wounds, and it's an entire model that is gone. Now, Space Marines all have a special rule, and they shall know no fear, which allows them to re-roll failed morale checks. So I would be able to take this die and re-roll if I wanted to, but you have to understand that when you re-roll, you always have to take the second result. In this case, I actually got a 5 again, but I could have actually rolled a 6 and made it worse. But obviously, with this roll, I'd have a pretty good chance of making it better. So I still got 9. I failed it by 1. I get to choose 1 model, and he is slain as well, so we'll take him off. We then go over to the Plague Marines, and we do exactly the same thing. Plague Marines actually happen to have leadership 7, just like the Space Marines do, with a leadership 8 on their champion, who is still alive. This guy right here is the champion. So they lost 4 guys, so we would roll a die, and they only rolled a 1, and we would add that to the number of guys who died, which is 4, and so they got a total of 5, which is equal to or less than the leadership of 8, which means nobody flees. That is it. That's morale. There's really nothing else to it. You might have some special rules that help it. You might have commissars who make sure that no more than 1 person flees. Or you might have rules like the poxwalkers who never take morale tests. Or you might have synapse from Tyranids who auto-pass morale if they're within synapse range. But for the most part, those are all exceptions to the rule, and they'll be pretty clear in their data slates how they work. This is the morale phase. Models with the transport rule allow you to place models inside of them. Obviously, you can't physically do this, so you just place them off to the side of the table or onto a sidebar or something. Some people even like to place the models on top to represent that they're inside of the vehicle. This Chimera, for example, from the Astra Militarum has a rule that says this model can transport 12 Astra Militarum infantry models. There are some stipulations, like it says, for example, that the heavy weapon teams count as 2, which makes sense because they're actually 2 guys each. And so, other than that though, as long as they're Astra Militarum infantry, you can put whoever you want in there. Now there's a couple stipulations. One is that the entire unit has to be able to fit inside of it. You can't leave some outside and some inside. But you could put multiple units. Let's say we had a squad of 6 infantry and these 3 heavy weapon teams, which count as 2 each for the purposes of the transport capacity. I could actually put them both in the Chimera because together they add up to 12 occupants, which is totally allowed. Or if I had a space left over, I could stick a character in there. Heck, I could fill up a transport with the 12 characters if I wanted to, as long as they all follow the restrictions that they are all Astra Militarum infantry. While they're inside the vehicle, they're pretty well protected. I say pretty well because if the vehicle dies while they're in there, it's kind of risky because they can just flat out die no matter how strong they are. They could be a mighty Space Marine Terminator or a lowly Astra Militarum infantry, and they have the same chance of dying whenever the vehicle is actually dead. Now thankfully most vehicles are pretty tough. They have a lot of wounds, a good toughness, a good save, so they're not going to go down really quickly, and they're also really fast, so they can help transport your guys up the battlefield pretty fast. So as long as when you set up the transport basically while you're deploying, we'll talk about deployment more later in a later video, but just in short, when you set up a transport, units can start inside of it rather than on the table. Now, while units are inside of it, they lose any aura abilities. Like, for example, if a commissar buffs nearby guys, he gives them his leadership, he helps them not to run away, and he just makes them much more resilient to the morale phase. But while he's inside of a vehicle, none of that applies. We have Space Marine captains who give reroll 1s to hit for nearby Space Marines. If they're inside of one of their Rhinos or Razorbacks or Land Raiders, that goes away. And so on and so forth. When you're also inside, you cannot fire your weapons unless the vehicle has the open top special rule. If it has the open top special rule, then you basically fire and you just trace from any point. So if this was open top, which it's not, and these 3 heavy weapon teams were inside of there, then I could just fire as if the missile launcher was any point of the vehicle, but I still have to follow the restrictions of the vehicle. So if the vehicle is locked in combat, then I can't fire the missile launchers. If I move, well, those missile launchers are heavy weapons, so I'd get -1 to hit, and so on and so forth. Now, the other thing you have to know about transports is how to embark and disembark. Embark, of course, meaning getting on, and disembark meaning getting off. So let's talk about the friendly way to disembark and embark rather than talk about the getting destroyed way. If you want to embark on the transport, if all your models in a unit end their move within 3 inches of a friendly transport, they just embark on it. You just remove them. So these guys do their move. They all end within 3 inches. It doesn't matter what part. I know you'll see on the models some like access points. That mattered in previous editions. In this edition, it does not matter. So they all get there, then we just pull them off the table and just remember that they're actually embarked on that vehicle. The heavy weapons team could then move within 3 inches. They got much bigger bases, so it's a little harder for them to do it, but they can do that, and then you'd remove them from the table as well. Disembarking works in the opposite way. If the vehicle has not yet moved, you can disembark. If you move the vehicle, you cannot disembark. Disembarking just means at the beginning of your movement, you just take them out and place them within, wholly within 3 inches of the vehicle. After they get out, they can actually act normal. They can move, they can advance. If they don't advance, they can shoot, they can charge, just like any other unit that started right there. However, Even if they don't move, they do count as having moved. So when your missile launcher squad gets out, 1, 2, 3, all within 3 inches, even if they choose not to move any further, they will count as moving for the purposes of their heavy weapons. And after everybody gets out, the vehicle is free to drive away and do whatever the heck it wants. They even have other guys embark on it. There's really no restrictions. Now, I was talking about how dangerous it is to be on a vehicle when it dies. Let's say we had this Chimera full of all those guys, and this Plague Marine finishes it off with his plasma gun. Well, before we actually destroy the vehicle, now most vehicles have an explode rule where if you roll a 6, nearby units suffer some mortal wounds. We're not going to really talk about that because it's not too important. You can just read that on their data slates, how that works. But let's say he does take it to 0 wounds. Before we remove it from the table, we disembark everybody inside of there, 3 inches. And by the way, all of these disembarks have to end more than an inch away from the enemy. So if he actually has the vehicle surrounded when it dies, then everybody inside is just dead. Any model that you cannot place is just slain. And so a common thing to do against transports, if your opponent is foolish enough to leave his guys in there for too long, is to surround it and then kill it, and the guys can't get out, so they all automatically die. So we place everybody on the table. We then remove the transport, and then we roll a d6 for each guy that came out. So we'll take these 6 right here. We don't have to roll them individually. It's okay. We roll them all at once. And if we roll any 1s, in this case we got 1 1, then that unit suffers, or sorry, then for each roll of 1, a model that disembarked of your choice is slain. So actually, sorry, I should have rolled 9 dice. It's not depending on the unit. So I should have rolled 3 more. So let's say I got 1 more 1. So since there's 9 guys that got out, I know that these count as 2 each, but it doesn't matter. We still just roll 1 die for each of them. Then a model that disembarked of your choice is slain. So it doesn't do it separately. You don't roll 6 dice for them and 3 for them. You roll 9 of them all together. So I rolled 2 1s, and so I'm like, oh, I don't want these guys to die, so I'll just have 2 of these die. So you do have some protection. Like if you have a character in there who's really powerful, well, everybody else has to die before he does, if that's what you want. But it's still very dangerous, because you notice I didn't get to roll a saving throw. You'll notice that it didn't matter if they had any disgustingly resilient or other things that let them ignore wounds, because they don't take wounds, they are slain. You'll notice that none of that stuff mattered. Which means if these were Space Marine Terminators, which, trust me, cost a lot more points than Astra Militarum infantry, they would die just as quickly. So you've got to be very careful about bringing them into combat in transports. Now, usually it's not going to be too much of a problem. You put them in transports turn 1, you drive up and get out before the opponent has a chance to destroy them. But it will happen. And that is exactly how transports work. The rest is just vehicle or monster rules, which works just like everybody else. They can charge, they can shoot, they can advance, and do whatever it is that their profile says that they can do. And that's all there is to the morale phase and transports. We're getting to some of the rules that when you talk about them individually, it really doesn't take that long to talk about them, but we still need to kind of break them out and see how they work to make sure you're doing them right, because there might be some assumptions that you do that just don't end up being right. So always go back and check your rule book, especially after you've played a couple games. And then go watch the battle report, where we're going to have lots of transports in action so you can see how they work. Hopefully we'll get to see all the different interactions, the transports dying with guys inside, and transports moving up, people getting out, people embarking and disembarking, people dying because of failed disembarks, all that kind of stuff. Battle report below, which is in the MiniWarGaming vault. And make sure you tell your friends who want to learn how to play Warhammer 40k 8th edition about this. Tell them to go to miniwargaming.com/how-to-play 40k. Thanks for watching. Happy wargaming.